Okay, folks, please be seated. We're going to keep this on as best we can on time. Tom Entry, again, Chair of the Board, Montana Taxpayers Association. This is our 98th annual meeting, afternoon session, and we're hopeful of making it to 5:15, and that means that we're going to try to start promptly and go through as quickly as we can on breaks and so forth. Our first speaker, whose topic is, that's interesting, a sneak peek at the Montana outlook for 2020. Pat Barkey is BBER, been here since 2007, and I think I've introduced him every year since 2007. And I think they ask anybody when we were trying to figure out who was going to introduce, anybody ever heard of Falls State University? And since I went to school with somebody from Muncie, Indiana, they knew who it was, and so I had my hand up, and the next thing I know, I'm introducing Pat Barkey. And so Pat came there to take Paul Polson's position and has been there ever since. For a while there, he came in, I think, 2007, and I think you know what 2007 and 8 were in Montana and the rest of the world. So he came in, and for a while, for a couple of years, it was Pat and Terry Johnson, and we had a panel called Gloom and Doom. And so it was to see who could be the gloomiest and the doomiest of the two, Terry being the over in the LSO. So anyway, Pat's got abundance of knowledge. He has makes some predictions, some turn out right, and but he wants to give you a sneak peek. So I think so that you will sign up and pay up for his seminars throughout the state. So without further, Pat Barkey.
Thank you. Economics requires commanding audio. That's one of my mottos. And I'm not sure I've got it today, but I have a lot of things to talk about, not much time. So the way there's two ways to do that. One is to talk fast. That's no good. So I'm going to gloss over some topics that really deserve more attention because there's so many of them. And try to leave some time for questions, and maybe we can see what you want to talk about. Of course, nothing is free in economics. We teach that, and we live that. We are doing a program on the economy for the 45th year. Our theme is finding good workers. We hit the road January 28th. And as always, our very first show is right here in Helena, Montana. The schedule's there. There's actually 10 cities, more than fit on a slide. But we'll be going around the state with our half-day programs, and really look forward to seeing you at one of those. One thing we could spend the whole afternoon talking about is what's going on with the U.S. economy. Because, you know, economists are always accused of this on the one hand, on the other hand business, right? I mean, that's the beauty of our profession. That's probably why I didn't become an engineer. Apparently you can't design a bridge that way. But you sure can talk about the economy that way these days, because that's where we are right now with the U.S. economy. Because there's really two stories about the U.S. economy, and depending on which side of bed you get out, both of them are equally compelling. The first story is that, you know what? Things are slowing down. The world economy has been slowing down for quite a while, and it's going to catch up with us. We're integrated with that. And by the way, there's an inverted yield curve. 10-year Treasury bonds are less than 2-year Treasury bond yields. And it's been that way for quite a while, and it's not a fluke. We've been marching towards it. We crossed the line. It's a negative yield curve. And you know, that's been a really good predictor of every recession. And by the way, we've got this thing going on with trade. Didn't have time to take this word out. I was told this was a partisan word, but it sure looks like a catastrophe to me. It's certainly a moving target. Whether you think it's good or bad, it's having some really big impacts on the economy. And let's face it, this growth candy we've been eating for a while at the federal level in terms of tax cuts and increased spending and $1 trillion deficit that's starting to wear off. So it sure does look like this side of the story is 2020, you know. Better think about pulling up your tent stakes. But then you get into this other argument where, you know, this time it's different. I put that in quotes because every time somebody says that, it's never different. But it might be. There's always next time. Because really, what's going on in bond markets that's making this yield curve invert has to do with what's happening globally. And the fact that people perceive a lot of global risk out there that doesn't exist to the same extent in our economy. They're pouring their dollars and their investments here, and they're driving down yields and giving us this result. And by the way, have you noticed that consumer spending is really strong? And that's not a fluke either. That's really driven by fundamentals. Yes, consumers are borrowing a little bit more money, but they're also making a lot more money, and they're saving money as well. So it's the fundamentals are pretty good. Interest rates, the Federal Reserve finally got them back down to where they should be. And you know, it's funny how this gloom over the international economy, how quickly it can dissipate. A couple facial ticks from the Chinese negotiators, a couple ticks up in the markets, and all of a sudden everybody thinks everything's good. So I'm not sure which one of these really to believe. Right now the tendency is to believe the second one, right at the moment. That'll change. But when you look at the U.S. economy, it's really remarkable what consumer spending is doing for growth. Contribution to growth made by consumer spending, these blue bars, it's been durable, it's been uninterrupted, and it's not showing any sign of slowing down right through the third quarter of 2019. Consumer spending is a push for growth. What about business spending? Well, not quite as good. When you look at non-residential business investment, that's been a negative. That's bad. That's a sign that people are pulling back a little bit on investment. Some of the other categories, there's quite a few here. There's housing, which is moving the needle a little bit. It's been positive. It's been a good summer for housing in the U.S. economy and the Montana economy. Some of the other things, inventories move this around a great deal. Then you have trade, which has been a negative. It's been a drag on the economy, and government, which has been expansive. You get this overall growth picture, which is not bad. But the big story is that what's propelling growth is its consumption. And consumption is the biggest part of the economy. And that's pretty good. And there's other things to worry about. Now, when you look at the forecast, this is interesting. I had this as of a few months ago, and it was much less bullish. But right now, forecasters are more bullish about 2020 for the U.S. economy. Growth around 2%, most recent quarters. People expect it to be pretty slow in this quarter, the fourth quarter. That number's not out yet. And that growth is, peaking up to 2.5% next year in 2020. That doesn't look like a recession. But forecasters aren't very good about calling recessions. The U.S., as the international economy is slowing down, let me not dwell on this one too much. Let me talk about some of the special things that most of us know about, but maybe I'll just put a few numbers on these things for you. By far the biggest event going on in the U.S. economy now, and in fact the global economy, is the trade tsunami, the trade storm. Okay, I didn't say catastrophe. The trade thing. All right. There's something going on with trade. How do we quantify it? Well, we have tariffs. Gee, we had tariffs in the 30s too, didn't we? That didn't work out too well. We have tariffs now, and we have rising tariffs. How do we measure these things? All right. Well, one way of measuring them is, of course, in tariff rates. But tariffs don't apply to everything in the economy. So let's look at the tariff collections relative to all imports. So this is sort of like a sales tax on imports. But it's a little misleading because it's lumpy. Some things get really socked and some things escape it. But overall, these bars give you an idea of where we've come from since the beginning of last year, 2018. We've come from the sales tax, if you will, of less than 2% to something by the time we get to the end of this month will be coming in at about 6%. All right, with some things paying 33% and some things paying 2%. All right, so that's quite a change. That's a massive change. And of course, That's the tariffs that we're imposing on people that we buy from, which have to ship their goods to us. There's the retaliatory tariffs, which are of great concern. And I'm going to show you a graph, which is, it's a little nasty, and it's also not labeled, which I personally hate these kind of graphs. I want labels. So I have to explain this to you without you seeing the labels up here. But this is trying to show you, with the darkest red being the highest and the whites being the lowest, the exposure of every county in the US to the retaliatory tariffs being imposed on our exports, all right, that have occurred. Well, this goes back only to 2017, 2018. There's a lot of analysis behind this. So this doesn't even bring it right up to the current time. This is at a time when the trade war had just started and these tariffs are being imposed. And you notice where the dark red is. It's really the Farm Belt, especially the Farm Belt in the Great Plains. And then you can easily move over here to Montana and see the ag counties that have a great deal of exposure to that. You look at eastern Washington, eastern Oregon. This is ag front and center. And this is what's really being laid out to dry by the retaliatory tariffs imposed in this tit-for-tat trade war. This is a big deal for Montana, big deal for certain industries, but also a big deal for the whole economy. Another way of showing you what the impact of tariffs has been is a little more wonky. It's at least better labeled in this case. And this is trying to look at US container imports. All right, so what's been the effect of tariffs on imports? Big change. Especially when you look at those red bars that are going negative. Those are container imports from China. Look at those. They've gone from between 5 and 10% before 2018, and then 2018, first quarter is about the time we date the real trade war really starting, and you look at how strongly negative those are going. So that's really an indicator that these tariffs are making a big change in the goods industries in particular, and of course they go both ways. You know, there's a retaliatory tariffs and so forth. Well, let's get a little closer to Montana. I like to bring people up to date on commodities in terms of what's going on with commodities. It's good news and bad news. For wood products, it's mostly bad news. Wood products, framing lumber has fallen back after a brief high point a year and a half ago. They've fallen back to levels you can see relative to the 5-year high, 5-year low. You can see the per 1,000 feet board feet framing lumber, $360. The ag commodities, this is not a super good way of putting it. You can see beef and wheat where they are relative to the high and the lows. What we really want to know is what's going on with calves. And collectively, if you look at calf prices and wheat prices, there's been about another 15% decline, give or take, in those prices. So some real hard times continuing for Montana ag producers. On the metal side, the story's a lot better. Copper prices are in the mid-range, palladium is against the peg, and oil price, that's as of October, it's now moved into the 60s, with some expectation of falling back. Oil prices have been really a very moderating influence compared to the volatility those prices have shown in history. So what do we know about the Montana economy right now? Especially what do we know that's different than maybe we were last summer or maybe even a year ago? Well, we know now that the growth that really kicked in 2016, since 2016, it's continued. So there's been another strong year of growth. That's heartening. It shows up in a lot of places, shows up in tax revenues, shows up in employment, shows up in labor markets. We're still growing, we're growing reasonably fast. That's good news. The labor market is continuing to tighten. So you just take the dots and you extend them out a little further. Although there's some evidence of at least a little bit of moderation. Clearly, we just heard that the state revenue growth has been good. Taxpayers Association meeting. I expect you're going to hear about tax revenues a little bit. So I'm the second one on the podium to talk about taxes. Be many more to follow, but it's certainly been pretty good. I talked about the situation with ag prices. Clearly, one of the new developments for Montana has been the dark clouds for Powder River Basin coal. You know, I mean, there's all kinds of things happening on the Wyoming side. You know, we've had 2 closures. You've had Arch and Peabody. kind of join hands and kumbaya, and that joint venture, those two, is clearly not going to employ the same amount as they did separately. That's on the Wyoming side. Here, of course, on the Montana side, we've had the bankruptcy of Cloud Peak, all the turbulence happening, Colstrip and Westmoreland, that's new. Tech is an underreported good news story, but it won't be in a few minutes because we'll have Christine Henderson from the Montana High Tech Alliance to talk about that story, because it really, it's a force, particularly in Bozeman and Missoula, and to a more limited extent elsewhere. Oh yeah, what do we know about the Montana economy today? Well, it was bad enough that we lost in football. But this one's going to be a little bit harder to win back, because it actually happened last year, but this year it become more solid. Gallatin County is now the second largest economy in the state. This is no longer by the fraction of a decimal point. Give or take, personal income, Gallatin County is about 6.25 billion, and Missoula is like 5.8 something. So it's feeling familiar to a lot of Montana communities to see Gallatin County just go right by. And Billings knows what that feels like in terms of airport employments, and so there you are. Interestingly enough, Gallatin County doesn't have the highest it doesn't have a higher population or employment than Missoula, of course, which is the former number 2. But the jobs pay more. All right, that's new. So what's the story? The big story is growth, and when you look at the percentage increase in inflation-corrected non-farm earnings. So non-farm earnings, that's not all income, so that's not necessarily the tax base, but this is the income that comes from employment, comes from productive activity. So this is kind of our proxy. We like this better than GDP for a lot of reasons. So this is our scorecard for how the economy is growing. You can't help but notice that big hiccup there in 2016. Of course, these are calendar year numbers, but that impacted the tax collections that was alluded to at lunch, and everybody in this town knows about that. Special session, there it is. But 2017, strong bounce back year. 2018, pretty good year, just about as good. 2019, don't have it. Not going to get that for another 6 months. It's amazing how long it takes to get regional data. Where does that stand relative to our peers? We're judged against some pretty tough competition. We're pretty close to the state of Washington. Washington's in the red. They're growing really, really fast. 5.6% inflation corrected. Nevada, Utah, no slouches either. The next tier is right about where Montana fits in. Our 2.6, which is just the same number I showed you on that graph, but now some state comparisons. There you see Wyoming is really sharply negative still because of the volatility in energy is happening there, and the Dakotas are coming back thanks to some stability that occurred in the energy, especially for North Dakota. What do I know about 2019? Well, I do know a lot, but I don't have the complete picture. So what I'm going to show you is suggestive, and I think it's pretty good data, but I just want to share with you that it's not the full thing. It's not full because I don't have all components of earnings yet. I only have wages and salaries, and I only have it through the first half of the year. But if you look on a fiscal year basis, and you look at where the growth came into, growth really did carry into 2019. So what's propelling growth in the Montana economy? And the answer is lots of stuff. A big force has been construction. Manufacturing and construction are shown in that first bar, but most of that is construction. A lot of that is in western Montana, although Billings had a good year in construction as well. Finance and business services. A lot of tech is there. A lot of financial institutions are there. Housing's doing very well. Real estate's doing very well. That picks up a lot of pieces of the economy. But really the answer is mostly everything. Public administration is the only one showing up with a 0. Notice that mining is positive. I showed you mining involves oil production. Mining involves metal mining. Mining involves coal. Mining involves quarries. Quarries are doing well when housing construction is doing well, and so forth. So it's really a pretty broad-based growth. Somebody asked me, what is that, doom and gloom joke? When are you going to stop making that joke? This is all good news here, right? When you look at where the growth is coming from, again, pushing into 2019, you see this growth all around the state. No surprise that Gallatin is the strongest growing in terms of millions of dollars, so it's not percentage terms. The rest of the state, though, collectively had a pretty good year. I mean, that's been some rebound in growth in energy, as I said, some growth in counties adjacent to the urbanized counties like Park and Madison counties and so forth, Lake County, Valley County. These counties aren't in the Big Seven, but they're growing as well. You can see Missoula's growth picks up. Flathead, surprisingly, has really cooled off. Like I say, I have a lot of things I could be talking about. I don't have too much time. But the growth is pretty widespread. Silver Bow is kind of more or less moving sideways, and that's been a continuing story there. You're going to talk about tax revenues, but I'm looking at tax revenues as an indicator of the underlying economy. And of course, we've had double-digit growth in income tax, and that's great for the Treasury, but also tells me as an economist something about the base. That's a good thing. I also look at some of these other smaller categories, different pieces of the economy, rental car sales tax, lodging taxes, indicative of a pretty good year for visitor economy and so forth. So that's the way I'm looking at this. I don't see a lot of bad news here. Some negatives with respect to some of the energy taxes and so forth, but pretty good. Growth around the state. It's always hard to see patterns here. The red is the fastest, the green is the slowest. Some of these counties are big, population-wise. The ones that are big area-wise, you can clearly see. But the growth is starting to spill out adjacent to Gallatin. Like I said, some of the adjacent counties there with growth. Even the ones in turquoise are growing pretty fast. You look at some of these trajectories. I'll go through these pretty quickly. But we're a very diverse state. I mean, we're very, very different. And it's hard to understand each other's problems and each other's opportunities. But there's the escalator ride that Gallatin's on. So in terms of wages, they're almost up to 150. That means they've grown by about 50% since 2014. The whole economy. That's pretty strong growth. All right. Montana's no slouch. We've grown a little less than 20%. That's good. Yellowstone County is more on par with local growth. It's had some sideways movement, but a little pickup, a little more irregularity there, caused by some of the big industrial commercial projects. Silver Bow, like I said, is more of it's a completely different dynamic. It doesn't have nearly the dynamic, doesn't have the population in-migration. Here in Lewis and Clark County, it's kind of interesting. You look at that and you see Lewis and Clark lower in Montana. That doesn't look good, and that's true. Cumulatively speaking, growth here has been slower. But the last year, there's been a pretty big pickup in growth here locally. Cascade County has had a pretty good year. Some irregularity. Good news. Missoula has grown faster than the state. And Flathead County has been growing faster, but it's started to flatten out. Lots of stories there, lots of things to talk about. What's that doing for the labor market? Well, the labor market is still getting tighter, but there's been some change there. If you look at the unemployment claims, the count of people collecting unemployment insurance in Montana for the 12 months of 2017, a couple of years ago, it looks like this, low in the summer, high in the winter. You compare that to 2018, the curve shifts down in all those months. So that indicates fewer people looking for work, collecting unemployment insurance while looking for work. And then 2019, this takes us right up through October. In the first half of the year, we had continued tightening, but it looks like we're kind of about as tight as we've been the last 5 or 6 months. It looks like the tightening labor force has slowed at least, but of course we have very low unemployment rates. Unemployment rates don't tell the full story though. Boy, here's another unlabeled graph. That's not good. Labor force participation rates, that's the fraction of the adult population that's either working or looking for work. These two lines are supposed to show you Montana and the US. They're pretty similar, so the fact that the labels didn't make it, maybe it's not as crucial. But the one that starts up high in the beginning, that's Montana, and they both declined. So they declined in the recession, no surprise there. Recession throws people out of work, some people get discouraged, they go on disability, they retire early, they do something. But then the strong economy is supposed to bring them back in, not happening, all right? So low unemployment, conventional unemployment rates don't count those not looking for work. There's warm bodies out there, is what this is saying. But they're not really looking for work. They found other ways of getting by. Maybe they live in your basement. I'm not sure. I've showed this graph before, but when you look at the demographics of the workforce, what we have today is a demographic where the growth, the composition of the population, excuse me, not the composition, the number of the population in this 36 to 65 age group, which is the fourth set of bars, the one right, just not quite the last one, but the fourth one there, you can see how that's leveled off and it's even forecast to stagnate. There are some demographic challenges ahead for the Montana economy, and these have very little to do with the economy, but they really do factor into the labor market, and that's an issue. So what do we see heading into 2020? Well, really, as long as you don't look at ag, we really have pretty good momentum going into next year. It's really difficult to see what's not working for the Montana economy other than agriculture. Clearly, you can go to some counties with some different dynamics, but when you add up the whole total, it's been a pretty good couple of years without too much sign of a let-up. I think there's more optimism now for the global economy. That can change in a hurry, but for the moment, that's good news for Montana, because we do produce a lot of things for the global economy, particularly in the natural resources side. Trade policy has been quite damaging, and that is a huge concern. It's hard to model that because you don't know what it is. I don't know what our trade policy is. I find out in the afternoon, just like the rest of us do. It seems to be changing a lot, but that fact alone, the fact that we don't know what it is hurting. You saw that trend in investment spending in the national economy, how it's turned negative. I can't help but think those two things are correlated. Very quietly, real estate, financial institutions are set for another good year. We've had low mortgage rates, which have helped defuse a little bit of the high cost of housing. We've had a pretty good pickup in construction, and we've had really some outstanding credit conditions. Energy and natural resource industries have stabilized. I think that's a huge story. I didn't dwell on that with that map, but those oil patch counties in the eastern part of the state, which have been hemorrhaging income and jobs, 25% decline in an individual year for Richland County in 2017, have stabilized and have started to grow a little bit, and that's been a big factor. Oh, well, yeah, tech is an unreported story. See, I said that twice, because it's true. I mean, tech is really moving the needle. I mean, how else is a county like Missoula doing so well? The university is flat or negative, and government's not growing. What's growing is tech. Of course, there's also visitor spending, some in-migration, but tech is really moving the needle. It shows up in various places in the state. Obviously, Bozeman is still the largest in that category. And really, the biggest problem ahead is we're forecasters, and we called it exactly right, with our theme. I mean, finding good workers, grow your own, find them someplace else, poach them from your neighbors. I'm not sure how. Huge problem in Montana, and nothing in this forecast says that problem's going to go away or get better soon. That was supposed to be a shorter than a half-hour talk. It didn't happen. Do I have time for a question?
Yeah, take some questions.
Okay, question, but only if it's really good. Okay.
I got a question.
Sure.
Hi, Christian Richardson. I work with the Montana Department of Commerce and the Industry Development Program. I moved to this job about 3 months ago. I had been living in Gallatin County in Belgrade after moving up from Arizona, where my 2,300 square foot house cost $250,000 down in Phoenix. You can't get a one-bedroom condo in Bozeman now for that amount of money. I didn't see any type of graph that showed real estate prices and the exponential increase in the price of real estate in the last X amount of years with all the growth that's going on in Gallatin County. But if you were to have laid that over the median income over the last X amount of years, do you see that the increase in real estate value is versus the income is sustainable in these communities where tech is growing so fast, like Bozeman and Missoula?
Short answer is yeah, it's sustainable, because the people moving to Bozeman came from San Francisco, and they think Bozeman's a steal. No, that's yeah. No, there's evidence that the housing Zillow predicts that median home values. This isn't rents, not the same thing, but associated with the same phenomenon. Median home values in Gallatin County will slow to only 5.6% next year. So there is some evidence that we're seeing a little bit of a slowdown in some of the higher priced markets. But of course, what's driving that is demand and some supply policies we talked about in our program last year. It's not sustainable forever, but it can, in a community like Bozeman, where 2,200 net new people move into Gallatin County every year. And many of those people bring their wealth with them, and certainly bring their housing demand with them. And I can tell you that community, even though there's a lot of construction going on, is not building that many net new units each year. So supply and demand, price is going to go up.
All right, anybody else? Real quick. Okay, thank you, Pat. Appreciate it. And on behalf of Montax, little memento.